Good evening, everybody. Sorry, I was grabbing water. Welcome to Wednesday. My name is Meshla for anybody that's new. I am primarily an audiobook streamer. I write and read my own Star Wars fanfiction. And, I occasionally play SWTOR. I'm thinking about starting some other games. But tonight, I am going to be reading chapter 14 to 16 from the story called Train Your Daughter. Before anybody gets any weird ideas, it's not what you think. Hi, just Snipa. The full translation of the story title is actually called Train Your Sons to Be Strong, but Train Your Daughters to Be Stronger. And I just shorten it to Train Your Daughter for ease. Sometimes also just TYD. So for anybody that's new, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you would be so kind to let me know where you found me from. If you're new, that would be appreciated. Just so I can get a handle with the person, that'd be awesome. Hi Wraith, how you doing this evening? I'm gonna turn that down a little bit. Ooh, sorry. Music is blowing my eardrums a little bit. May not be for you guys, but it is for me. So I'm gonna turn that down just a little. Just so I'm not like blowing my own eardrums. Alright. Also, please do let me know what you think of the new closed captioning. I'm using a plugin that's directly with OBS, so this is only the second time that I've been using it, so please let me know what you think. Alright. Yeah, sorry. I'm a little discombobulated today. Normally I would be playing SWTOR today, but I decided that since it's the day before Thanksgiving, that I would offer some cozier vibes than SWTOR might provide. Let me get that hydrate for you, Wraith. Give me just a second. There we go. Also, do let me know if the music is too loud. I'm still fighting with my levels a little bit. Trying to get the music to the point where you can hear it, but that it's not overpowering everything else. Alright. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Alright, so we are starting with chapter 14 this evening. And for anybody that has a question about the stories or about writing, please feel free to ask in chat. I do have some commands down below that you can play with if you like. Also, if you hear a word that you're not familiar with and you'd like me to translate, there is a command for that as well. It's !translate. And just some general, you can ask general story questions about what's going on. If you're unfamiliar, I'm happy to answer them. So, alright. Yeah, okay. Give me 2 seconds while I adjust some things. Okay. There we go. Closed captioning is being a bit funky. Did I break it again? Please tell me I didn't. No, we didn't. Okay. It's just a little bit of a delay. Alright. Chapter 14. Jared slowly opened the door to her room, bringing in a bowl of cool water and a towel. He took a few steps into the room and turned to look back towards the door, using the force to close it behind him. That done, he set the bowl on Marin's bedside table where he soaked the towel. He then wrung out the excess water before folding it and placing it on her forehead. Marin shifted at the sensation, her eyelids fluttering. "Mebana?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper as her eyes opened slowly. She turned her head towards the presence she felt in the room, her left hand reflexively reaching for a knife. "Easy," Jared said with a soft tone. "It's me, Marin. Jared." "Hi, eyeliner. Welcome in, ma'am." Marin's breathing evened out as she registered his voice. She tried to sit up, but fell back against the pillows after a few moments, utterly drained. "How long was I out?" she asked softly, sighing in frustration. She knew, eventually, the stunt she'd pulled in the forest would catch up with her. "You've been asleep for over a day," he said. "You were pretty well exhausted when we brought you in here. Most of the other students were worried. We hadn't seen you since you headed out to practice before meeting with Her Highness the other day." Marin flushed and fidgeted with a thick blanket draped over her knees. She stopped, pondering how to explain. "I was on a training exercise that my father had set up. I didn't even know about it until it happened," she finally said, wondering if she should tell him what happened. He'd seen the end of it. "Rest," he told her, soaking the towel again before placing it on her forehead. "Sensei already talked with the Mandalorian you were fighting and informed us of what was happening." He shook his head. "You had us worried, all the same. Hearing blaster fire and then seeing you flipping over the wall, and then in a duel with a person whose anger was coming off of him in such huge waves. The master had a conversation with him on the spot, so I'm told." Marin flushed in embarrassment and shook her head. "Etika's a good man, Jared. He just got a little caught up in the exercise, and I probably didn't help his mood much, either." "I could feel some of what was going on," Jared told her as he looked over. "I spoke with Master Cardivit, and he had me meditate to keep track of you." Her eyes widened. You did?" Her voice was surprised. Slowly, she sat up, wincing as she shifted the pillows to lean against them. "What did you feel?" she asked, thinking of how she'd projected and how much it had weakened her. "A lot of confusion, at first, but a lot of determination for the rest of the time," he told her. "It was hard to keep from heading out every time you were hit. I was so used to sensing you that when you were stunned, it felt so strange." Marin's mouth quirked. "I'm glad you didn't. It was my test alone," she said. But it surprised her that he'd been worried for her. After a moment, she frowned. "What did it feel like when I was stunned?" "From my point of view?" Jared asked as he closed his eyes. "Nothing. It was like as if I was looking at a scanner that you had just dropped off of." He shook his head and dipped the towel into the bowl again. "Sorry." "For what?" she asked, softly, turning to look at him in the low light of the room. She flushed and looked down, fidgeting again. "I sometimes forget that people care about me." Jared nodded softly as he paused for a moment. I know you told me that all you've known since Corellia has been your father and this other Mandalorian at times." She nodded. "It was hard at first for me to reconcile how Buer could be both ruthless and gentle. Ethan, too. I got used to Ethan being a little rougher, but this," she sighed. "I expected it to be hard when I woke up in stun cuffs." She chuckled a little at his expression and leaned back against the pillows. "But I certainly didn't help his mood with some of what I did." "I thought I picked up the trace of a mind trick," he said softly. "I can imagine his reaction to that." Marin giggled. "Oh, he was so mad. He didn't like it one bit. That, and I figured out how to deflect the stun darts. Well, most of them." She groaned, remembering how much the mind trick had trained her. "I've never done either before, but I felt a prompting almost." She shrugged, unable to explain it. "The Force guiding you," Jared told her. "It will give you an idea of what needs to be done, and the first time pulling a mind trick, especially on a strong old person, is rather draining." She nodded. "That he is. I felt like I was going to pass out right after I did it. And then one of his darts got me because I wasn't paying attention." She sighed and rubbed her face. "For a while last night I was worried myself." She paused and looked up at him. I had to keep moving during the night, and we ran afoul of a wolfhound. She swallowed, remembering the fear she'd felt then. I lost one of my knives because I let fly towards the wolfhound from the tree I was in. My knife hit shortly before Ethan's stun dart. She could feel her pulse quicken again at the memory. You mean this? Jared asked as he drew the knife from inside his vest and held it out to her, freshly cleaned. Marin's eyes widened. Where did you find that? She whispered, her voice awed as she took it almost reverently and restored it to the empty sheath on her belt, draped over a nearby chair. I knew roughly where you were when the wolfhound came out, Jared said as he watched her for a moment. I ventured out to retrieve it after I made sure that you were safe here. Marin looked back at him, her eyes huge. She knew what the knives meant, but did he? Why would you do this for me? She asked, drawing up her knees and pulling the blanket about herself. The movement made her wince slightly as she remembered the gash on her calf. I know a little bit about Mandos, Jared told her, but where I come from, a knife is important, more of an everyday tool as well as a weapon. Marin nodded. It's more than just that, even for me, she said. It's the closest I can come to fulfilling one of the 6 actions. Kajuri Veskargam, she said quietly, looking down at her knees. Right now, anyway. He nodded and helped her lay back down. You're still needing some rest, Marin. Don't worry, I'll be close by. Thank you for the lurk, Sniper. Welcome in, Eyeliner. How are you this evening? And I see Wraith, and I'm not sure who else is here. Oh, I see... Oh, that's a lurk from Ajo. My bad. I can't read. Thank you for the lurk, Ajo, and thank you for the love, Sniper. I appreciate you. If you could get me a shout out for Eyeliner and anybody else in here? Let's see. Eyeliner. Yeah, just Eyeliner at the moment, I think. Oh, and Arcturus, I think, is also a streamer. I think he's here. If you could get a shout out for him as well, that would be amazing. Let's see. Marin rolled over, a soft groan falling from her lips as she realized how much she still ached. She looked around her room and saw thin streams of light peeking through the thick drapes pulled over the single window. It had to be close to midday. She sat up slowly, and then stood carefully, grasping the edge of the bunk for balance as her legs threatened to give out. Gritting her teeth, she carefully stepped away from the bed and then took another step until she reached the window, pushing the curtains aside. She'd been right. The sun was high, but the courtyard was deserted as she looked down into it, which meant that everyone was either at the midday meal or resting during the hot hours. She leaned against the sill, catching her breath before returning to the bed and pulling on a clean tunic and pants she'd found folded neatly on the nearby chair. She then sat on the edge of the bed to carefully pull her boots on. Oops, 1 second. Dressed now, she slowly made her way to the corridor, stretching her legs after almost 2 days in bed. Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter, came a voice from down the hall. It brought Marin's attention down the corridor behind her, where she saw 4 students in only their inner kimono and trousers. But what got her attention was that they had Sageo holding up the sleeves of their kimono. 2 had bokken in their hands, and 2 held training sabers. It was not a good sign. Hi, Shadow. How are you this evening? Finally decided to come out? The one in the center asked. Special attention? Special tests? Do you think that entitles you to special treatment around here? The second asked. Their tone told Marin everything she needed to know about their intent. She looked up and swallowed, her eyes narrowing. I never wanted nor asked for special treatment here, she responded as evenly as she could, taking stock of the group and the space in the corridor. There wasn't much. She unconsciously spread her feet, readying herself should they charge. But could she handle 4? She had no weapon, save her knives, and immediately discarded those as an option. Whatever their reasons, she didn't want to injure them unnecessarily. They were spread out now, giving her little room to maneuver in the corridor. The 2 with bokken lifted them to a ready stance as they moved closer. What's going on here? they all heard behind them. Jared was approaching the group with his training saber in hand. "None of your concern, Jared," the first who spoke said as he and the other with the training saber turned to face him. "We just decided to give the new girl her own welcome. You can tell she's in no condition or training level to take on 4 of you," Jared said as he walked up and assumed a ready stance with his feet spread evenly. "And she's done nothing to deserve the resent you 4 have. Now, stand down." Marin frowned, seeing that Jared was on the other side of the group from her. It didn't leave her many options. Muttering a curse, she shifted to one of her Terras Kasi stances as she readied herself. "Have you thought about what you're doing?" Jared asked honestly. "Do you think that Master Card would stand for something like this? Assaulting a fellow student out of malice, especially with the strength of numbers?" He ignited his training saber and shifted to a ready stance again. "No, you will back down, now." They ignored him and closed the distance to Marin, crowding her into the wall. She lashed out instinctively with her left foot, knocking one of the bokken free of its owner's grip. But that was all she had time for as 2 others grabbed her and shoved her to the floor, the third lifting his training saber. Marin's eyes widened and she watched in horror as the one with the training saber brought it down, aiming for her neck. Squeezing her eyes shut, she could feel it moving towards her with the force. Jared rushed in and drove his shoulder into the student's back before the blow could even land. The student stumbled forward and, by tripping over Marin, fell to his face on the stone floor. Jared wasted no time in bringing his saber around in a backhanded strike that caught the student Marin had disarmed in the face. He went down, yelling from the mark from the low-powered training saber across his cheeks and nose. Jared used the force to hurl another off of Marin and used his saber to strike the third. By this time, the first was up, his nose starting to bleed from hitting the floor, and he raised his saber to attack Jared. But Jared's saber was already moving as he rushed in with an attack of his own. Marin heard the zap as the training saber hit flesh, and she cringed, expecting it to be her neck. When she felt nothing, she cracked an eye open and stared incredulously. One had blood streaming down from his nose, and another lay on the floor groaning, a nasty red welt across his face. Marin squirmed, trying to break free of the grip of the remaining students. She twisted and rammed her elbow into the chest of the one on the left, but being on the floor made it difficult to get leverage. A curse fell from her lips as she felt the blade edge of one of the bokken smack into her shoulder, hard. She fell back against the wall, her eyes watering. That swing had almost full power behind it. She turned her head, trying to track Jared, but hissed in pain as it tweaked her now bruised shoulder. He heard the pained hiss behind him and knew what was behind it and who it had come from. It took all he had to keep from coming unglued at the sound of it, as he ducked under the swing of the first student and brought his blade up in a grand arc that caught his opponent in the left hip, and he raked his blade upwards, going for as much of a chance to weaken him. The student fell from the amount of pain the blade caused as Jared turned but caught a strike on his left arm. The student wielding it had put his full strength behind it, and Jared knew that the muscles in his upper arm would be bruised. He ignored it as best as he could, swinging his blade with the right hand that caught the student in the neck. He went down dazed with a significant mark along his neck. Jared looked to see the last student, his saber raised and ready to strike. "That is enough." Those able to move in the direction turned to the direction the command came from, and all saw Master Card standing there. It was no surprise to Jared to see him, but what did surprise even him was that Master Card's lightsaber was in his hand, its unique blue-silver cord blade lighting up the corridor. Marin's eyes had drifted closed, but at the sharp sentence she opened them again, pushing against the wall as she tried to stand. Master Card had come around the corner, and she could see the other students backing away from him. And then she saw why. His lightsaber. She blinked and then registered the humming that now filled the hallway. It was of a deeper pitch than the training sabers. And the color. She'd never seen it before. She tried to stand and was able to, but she had to lean against the wall as the pain in her shoulder made her eyes water. "Sensei," Jared began to say. "Get Marin back to her quarters," Stefan told him, his tone laced with frustration about what he had found. "She's in no condition right now." Dylan walked up behind his father, his senses alerting him to what was happening. Call for your mother, Stefan told him as he looked at the other students. And as for you four, to the main hall, now. Yes, Sensei, the four said quickly and began to move to pick up the bokken and sabers they had dropped. No, Stefan told them. You leave them here. Marin swallowed at Stefan's tone. Even when he'd stopped Ethan 2 days before, she'd felt anger like this. She'd never felt anger like this, so tightly controlled. She pushed carefully off the wall and smiled faintly when Jared slipped her uninjured arm over his shoulder. She glanced at Mr. Card for a moment as she passed Dylan. Inwardly, she was trying to hold back angry tears. Just as she'd started to like it here and get comfortable, the other students had to ruin it. She tried to let her angry thoughts go as she breathed, trying to breathe through the pain in her shoulder. She didn't know what would happen to the 4 students who had attacked her. Sorry. Need some water. Okay. Words are hard today, apparently. We have an ad starting in about 5 minutes. I do try to not read during the ads, so I appreciate your patience while those ads occur. They do help support the channel. So I will keep reading until the ad starts. Okay. Alright. The 4 students waited in the main hall of the Praxium, kneeling on the mat flooring in front of the low table that was once an altar for the monks. They realized now that they were in the wrong. It had taken Master Card's intervention for them to see that. It was a message that they had gotten in multiple ways. First and foremost was that he drew his own lightsaber, not one of the training sabers. Its blue silver blade was alive, and for the first time they had seen it, and the second had been the look in his eyes and the tone of his voice. They had never heard him use the tone he had in the hallway. He was truly upset and disappointed at what they had done. They remained kneeling, wonder what would happen when they heard the doors, all of them, closing behind them. Stefan walked in front of them, contemplating sitting on the seat where the head abbot would have sat, had the monks still been here, but he remained standing behind the altar instead. I could not, he began to say softly, be more disappointed with what the 4 of you have done. All of you have been through the training with the Jedi since you were young and had requested to come here, even devoting yourselves to my instruction, and you act out of spite and jealousy against a girl who has only been here a short while. Sensei, the first of the group began to say, we realize now that... Stefan's look stopped the student mid-sentence, letting the words hang in the air between them. I'm glad that the 4 of you realize the wrong you have committed against Marin and your brother Jared. However, there is a consequence to your actions. Do you understand? Yes, Sensei, they said. You are confined to your quarters while I consult with others on the High Council. Meals will be brought to you, and I want you 4 to meditate on your actions. Once I have talked to the other masters and meditated myself, I will decide whether you will remain here or move to Chandrila. You are dismissed. The 4 looked at each other before they bowed to Master Card and left the room. Sorry. It's sitting all day. I need a stretch. Okay. How is she? Stefan asked his wife as she started coming out of Marin's quarters. Resting comfortably, I hope, Jade answered, closing the door softly behind her. I've treated the bruises they gave her and Jared. Besides that, she needs more rest from the trial she went through. I started to put her into a light healing trance, and then I decided that she could just rest. Maybe when Callista returns, she can instruct her Marin on it. If Jarius decides to let her stay that long, Stefan said as he carried her pack as they walked out of the students' quarters. When he hears about this, he may take her back home to continue her Mando training instead of continuing her training here. To be honest, Jade told him, I'm surprised you took her as a student. Why, or should I say how, could I turn her away? He asked as they walked across the courtyard. It wasn't just a favor for Jarius. Sensing her presence when they arrived, I could feel that this girl has a lot of potential. Even if she chooses Jarius's path, she still needs to know what she's capable of and the morals that can keep her from following whatever darkness could appear. Jade nodded as they left the Praxium to head towards the house. The sun would be setting soon, and it was casting warm light over everything. I asked Rinius to stay with them, just in case, she told Stefan. I don't think it will be necessary, but it's a good precaution, he said, taking her hand as they continued to walk. What will you decide to do? I need to meditate and consult with the rest of the council, he told her. Even though they've realized what they did was wrong, the fact that they succumbed to jealousy like that concerns me. If the council decides to let them stay here, their training will take a different turn for certain. Tomorrow, my love, she said as she moved closer to him as they approached the field. The lake wasn't far, and they could see their home on the other side. Tonight, you promised Catherine a story, and she'll probably be ready for that in bedtime. And that's the end of chapter 14. Yeah. Well, yeah, they're in trouble. They're in trouble. You'll be interested to see how they resolve that one. I think you would approve. It'd be interesting. Don't mind me, I'm grabbing a blanket because my legs are cold. Oh, goodness. So sorry for the extra noise. Yes, they are in trouble. Yeah. It's going to get real interesting here in a little bit. They're in trouble. I'm going to take a second to stretch here because I'm starting to shrimp, so I'm trying to avoid that. If you see me shrimping, slouching, please redeem a stretch. Should be channel points, or you can just yell at me in chat. That's fine too. I don't have sound alerts yet, something I'm still working on. But please feel free to yell at me in chat if you see me slouching. Also, where did I put those? Actually, I'm going to take a little bit of a break. And I'm going to go, while we're in the ad break, and I'm going to put in eye drops. So I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. Oh, good. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was dumb and forgot to put in eye drops. And I was starting to feel it. So, took advantage of the ad break. Alright. And we're back. I have good timing. Yeah. I took advantage of our ad break to go put in eye drops to make my eyeballs happy. Because they were getting cranky at me. Because I forgot to do that before I started. Alright. Chapter 15. Andrea walked into the main hall before passing through the courtyard, watching the students practicing and noting that the 4 were still confined. Dylan was overseeing the students, and Andrea nodded to him as she entered the students' quarters. When she reached Marin's room, she slowly opened the wooden door and walked in, noting that she was still sleeping. Slowly, Marin began to wake, sensing someone else in the room. Her hand reached for her belt in pure reflex, and the sheathed knives there before she even was fully awake. Then Marin opened her eyes and her senses, breathing as she scrubbed the sleep sand from her eyes with her other hand. "J'ai devant her, Andrea," she said softly, her cheeks heating in embarrassment as she realized she had a firm grip on her knife. "You can take it easy," Andrea told her with a customary smile as she sat beside the bed. "I wanted to come and check on you." Nisita," Marin said, flushing again as she slipped the dagger back into its sheath. "Guess I'm a little on edge." She fidgeted with the blanket for a moment before carefully pushing herself to a seated position and gritting her teeth against the curse that she almost said. I can understand after what those four put you and Jared through, Andrea told her softly. He's doing better, by the way, but Master Card has him working on some things to work through his injury. Daddy's got a hard decision to make about those four as well, so he apologizes for not being around to check on you. Baron nodded quietly. She knew enough about the way from her time here to know that what those students had done was serious. She chewed her lip for a few seconds, thinking. It almost made her want to cry. She was so frustrated. I'm not trying to be everyone's friend, but I'm not trying to make enemies either, she finally said. Her fingers curled into the blanket as she bit down on calling them a rather nasty name in her head. For what it's worth, they asked forgiveness from Daddy and Jared, Andrea told her as she put her arm around Marin. I know they haven't come to you yet, but they're not sure how you would take it since you follow a different code from the others here. Marin nodded and turned towards her, burying her face in the older girl's shoulder, her voice slightly muffled. I want to learn. I didn't ask for special treatment. I can't help how fast I learn. I'm kind of like a data retrieval droid that way. At Andrea's comment, she sighed. I'm glad they're willing to admit they were wrong, but it doesn't change what happened. Andrea nodded. Well, they know they're facing expulsion from here, too. And you didn't ask for any of this. I took you under my wing because Daddy felt I'd be the better choice to learn this particular form. No one else has shown a skill for the fourth form, so I guess that's the only way you're special. You have a unique talent in the Force, just like everyone else in different areas. And I'll tell you, Marin, the other students feel that there was no right call in what they did. That got her attention. Orihant? She asked, her eyes wide as she looked up at Andrea, absently brushing her hair from her face. Aye, Andrea told her. They consider you one of their own. Dylan held them back when the four walked from the main hall to their quarters for confinement. Marin cursed softly, her eyes wide as that sank in. It almost made her start crying as she remembered her comment to Jared a couple of days before. She hadn't thought about how much they might care for her. Andrea just held her for a few moments. She didn't know what to say. In some ways, she considered Marin almost like her own Padawan as she had started teaching her more and more of the fourth form. Marin bit her lip and sighed. I should probably rest some more, she grumbled. Okay. Jarius entered the gates of the Praxium late in the day, having just arrived back on planet from a contract he'd been working. He had some leads to follow later, but he felt the need to return and check on Marin's progress, and, truth be told, he missed his daughter. Ethan and Stefan had told him how she had done during Ethan's second trial, but he couldn't be more proud of her. He walked through the main hall and started to walk through the covered walkway that skirted the outer part of the courtyard. Respectful of the monastery, he wore the tunics of a warrior at rest, an outer kimono over his trousers and boots, and kept his weapons belt on with his blaster at his thigh and his combat vibroblade on his left hip. The students were out, probably on a late afternoon exercise, as he went to the section of the monastery set aside for the students' quarters. Jarius knew which room was his daughter's, and he opened the door slowly, but he was surprised to see her resting on the bed. But something seemed odd. Marin didn't look like she was sleeping well and actually showed signs of discomfort. What happened while I've been gone this time? He noticed a book with a soft nerf hide cover on her bedside table and knew it was a journal in which she'd been writing. It was something he'd encouraged her to do before they'd come here. Curious, and knowing that she probably wouldn't mind his reading it, he picked up the journal and sat in the chair next to her bed before he started to read one of the more recent entries. Working with Andrea is fun. She tries to make learning the fourth form like a game. I'm enjoying the time away from the Praxium. I still feel like I don't quite belong, but I do enjoy learning new things. We spent some time yesterday working on acrobatics. It makes me happy that I started working some into my morning runs. It made him smile to know that she was enjoying the lessons she was learning from Master Card and the others here. It was a welcome surprise to know that his daughter was even interested in training her, and he smiled as he continued reading. Today was another lesson with Andrea before the day got hot. I've been working on my forms whenever possible. After my lesson today, I was off in the clearing east of the Praxium. It was quiet, at least until I started sensing someone. I wish I'd paid more attention at the time. As it turned out, the person I'd felt was Ethan. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in stun cuffs and a blindfold, and what I discovered was the hold of his ship. I got shocked a couple of times when I first woke up. It took me 15 minutes to get out of the cuffs and another 10 or so to reach the lock on the hold hatch and then the main hatch. And that was just the beginning. I spent the next day and a half trying to evade him in the forest, and shasa, that wasn't easy. He had stun darts and seemed to know where I was even without seeing or hearing me all the time. I don't know how he does it, and it's somewhat unnerving. I ended up taking to the trees for a while. I wonder why I'd thought of it, considering how miserably it failed last time. I kept to the trees for a good while until it got dark. Not long after the sun faded, I felt something. It wasn't Ethan. I'd been sensing him more clearly since the ordeal started, which was strange. I couldn't sense him at first when I first met him, but now. He paced me pretty close through the night, darting me several more times. At first light, I finally broke through the tree line, reaching the clearing where Andrea's been holding my lessons. There were some large boulders, and I distracted Ethan long enough to make it to the first one. He didn't like that, and he sprayed stun darts at the boulder. That gave me an idea. Trying to divert his attention with something else hadn't worked, so I tried a more direct approach. Seeing myself crouched behind the boulder in my mind, I projected it out towards him, making him think that I took off for one boulder when I went to another. Oh, he really didn't like that. She'd scribbled out some words on the page. He sprayed so many darts towards my new hiding place that one ricocheted and tagged me. When I woke up, I felt like Othlic. I didn't know that trying that would drain me so much. I wasn't far from the Praxium by then. I made slow progress through the forest, but he still tracked me somehow. I'd been trying to avoid the darts, but when that didn't work, I tried to deflect them. I wasn't really sure what I was doing, but I could feel them coming and just misdirected them. He didn't like that much either. It took me a while, but I finally climbed a tree close to the wall. I was scared, but I took a running leap from the highest limb I could reach and barely made the wall. His darts followed me the whole way. It took all the concentration I had to deflect them enough so I landed unscathed. Then I dropped to the courtyard. He followed me and came at me with a bogan as a man possessed. I'd never seen someone so angry, and the hits I landed on him just made it worse. It took Master Card stepping in to end the duel. I'm not sure how long it took Ethan to calm down, but I could tell he was pretty mad. That entry got his attention, and he read over it again, slowly. Master Card and Ethan hadn't given him details on what happened during her test, certainly not about the duel they'd had at the end. Then again, he figured they may not have wanted to talk about that part over a comm channel. Jerry's thought that it made sense, and it didn't upset him, but the next entry definitely got his attention. The last couple of days have been rather ossicla. I've been resting from the test Ethan put me through until I couldn't take being still anymore. Thank you for the posture check, Wraith. I'm slouching. Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate you. Oh, so bad. There we go. So bad. I don't know why I keep slouching. Oh, sorry. Bumped my mic. Okay. Here we go. I had to get up and do something, so I decided to take a walk. That turned out to be a bad idea. 4 students cornered me in the hall. All were armed, 2 with bokken and 2 with training sabers. And then Jared showed up. He tried to get them to back off, but they wouldn't listen. They crowded me to the floor, one lifting his saber to strike. It never landed. As near as I can tell, Jared dived in and knocked the strike wide, going after the remaining students. He got somewhat banged up. Sick. I did too. One smacked me pretty hard in the shoulder with their broken before Master Card finally came to break it up. With his saber lit. I've never seen his lightsaber or seen him pull his saber in the presence of students. He was very upset, but it was tightly controlled like a panther waiting to strike. The 4 students were ordered to the main hall, and Jared got me off to my room. I haven't seen him since. I hope he's all right. It almost made Jarius come out of the chair. 4 students attacking his daughter? He was outraged when he noticed the door to Marin's room opening and looked to see Stefan standing there in the doorway. It didn't take Jarius long to rise from the chair, put the journal down, and walk across to the doorway. I didn't know you were... Stefan began before Jarius cut him off. What is the meaning of your students attacking my daughter? Jarius asked in a hushed but agitated tone. What have you to say, Master Card? The inflection of the last question made Stefan's expression turn to match the look Jarius was giving him. Outside, Stefan told him quietly. I will not have this discussion here. Jarius started down the corridor, his steps telling his mood now as Stefan followed him outside. Slowly, Marin opened her eyes. She was almost sure she'd heard someone talking and felt... Jarius? Was Buer back already? She opened her eyes and rolled carefully onto her back, reaching out in the force as she did so. He was here, but outside. She wanted to go and hug him, be surrounded by his strong arms, but she was still sore, and the feeling she got from him was angry. She wasn't used to sensing that from him, and she frowned, glancing around her room. He'd been here. The chair beside her bed was still warm to her touch, and her journal had been moved, meaning that he'd probably read it. She sighed and cursed softly. I don't want to go, but I can understand why he's upset, she thought, looking towards the window. Now, Jarius said in frustration as they entered the outer part of the courtyard away from the training circle, what the hell happened? 4 students approached her, Stefan told him frankly. Jealous at the time of her ability to pick up on my lessons quickly and for Andrea taking her under her wing, they had no call and have expressed genuine remorse for it. Jarius frowned, his fingers unconsciously curling into a fist as he remembered the tense set of Marin's shoulders. He took a breath, willing himself to relax. What is to be done with them? He asked, referring to the 4 students. Regardless of the remorse, they did something against the way. Oh, sorry. A giant smudge on my glasses. Okay. There we go. Had to find my spot. They will be dealt with, Stefan assured him firmly. The other masters and I will meet and hold a council over this because this is very serious and needs to be addressed now. And America and Jared? His voice had a concerned yet slightly hard edge as he looked squarely at Stefan. Master Card, I'm concerned. What if this should happen again? Maybe this isn't the best place for her to be right now. His voice sounded somewhat pained even as he said it. Stefan walked closer and put a hand up on his friend's shoulder. Jared rushed to her defense, Jarius. They would have too if most of the other students knew what would happen. Dylan had to take them out on a special run right now to keep them from thinking of rushing to Marin's defense after what happened. If the council decides to let those 4 remain here, accepting a punishment that I'll merit, they won't have an easy time. None of the other students will let them forget this, Jarius. He told his friend with a soft, confident smile. They consider your daughter one of their own, whether she walks the Jedi path or not. Jarius' eyes widened then, and he stared at Stefan for a moment before he spoke again. This Jared, how is he? I read some of America's journals and got the sense that they're good friends. He took a hit to his upper arm and bruised it good, but he gave better than he got, Stefan told him. Jared was one of my first fresh students, brought to me by a fellow Jedi who sensed his talent in the Force. He's helped Marin along since her first day. That made Jarius smile for the first time since he'd entered the Praxium earlier. It's a good sign that she's made such good friends. I know that must have been difficult at first, given her past, he said softly, sighing and rubbing at his chin. Stefan nodded. She's taken some time to open up, but she has, I think. And when I say he gave more than he got, one needed more treatment than the rest. Jerry's raised an eyebrow. How do you mean? America's journal didn't describe the fight in great detail. Jared is one of my better students since he came to me fresh. The others have had more traditional training in the way, Stefan began to tell him. He's absorbed himself in learning what I instruct here. One of the 4 cut his training saber in the face. They're not used to that type of attack in our sparring session, so he was blinded for a short while. Sorry. Jerry swore softly in surprise. I see. He paused, thinking, do you think I could speak to America for a little bit? She hasn't seen me in a week or so. I know she's resting. She woke up just as we were walking outside, Stefan told him as he pointed to her window. And she's wondering what we're talking about. Jarius grinned. Always curious, that one. I'll sit with her then. She's probably going shabla crazy sitting still. Okay. Marin sighed and laid back carefully. They'd been outside for quite some time now, and she was getting rather restless. She wanted to see him, as it had been quite some time. She'd almost got out of bed, but remembered Andre's last words urging her to rest. She made a frustrated noise and tried to calm herself. Still having to learn some patience, Jerry said as he stood in the doorway and smiled at her. Marin grinned lopsidedly and sat up carefully, hissing as the movement pulled at her shoulder. Beware, you're back! She glanced towards the window for a moment. I thought I'd heard you in here earlier. I was, he said as he moved to sit on the edge of the bed and hugged her carefully. Master Card and I needed to have a word. It seems like you're getting all kinds of training and tests here. Marin nodded, but sobered a little, burying her face in his tunic for a moment, her voice somewhat muffled. Sometimes I feel like it's almost too much. She fussed with the hem of her sleep shirt for a moment, trying to describe how she felt. Are you wanting to leave? He asked, point blank. Master Card tells me you've made great progress. Marin bit her lip and hugged him tightly. I kind of do, but I feel like if I leave, they win. She swallowed, breathing slowly as she tried to calm the flare of anger. I didn't ask for anything special when I came here. You did, he told her. You asked to learn how to use the power you've been given. They did too. From what I understand, you're treated no differently than they are. Your training differs from theirs, sometimes theirs from yours. All of you here are special. Don't ever forget that. And, he added, you are special to me. You are my daughter, not them. All the special that counts. Marin smiled and buried her face in his tunic again. I've missed you. I wish you could be here training with me sometimes. She knew how he felt about that topic, though. He smiled and closed his eyes for a moment. I had some things I needed to take care of. I'm proud of what you've been able to accomplish here. He looked at her with a broad smile. Being trained by his daughter, no less. I understand she looks to you almost as her Padawan. Were you to walk that path, she might have just taken you as one. Marin flushed and grinned. I like her. She's nice, and she tries to make the lessons fun. She shifted for a moment. You know my choice there, Beware. I want to be with you. She hugged him again. I'm just tired of being stuck in bed. I wish there were something I could do. Lady Card wants me to rest, though. She sighed. They just want to make sure you're up to form when you're ready, he said, winking at her. They don't know you as I do. How's your shoulder? Can you rotate it with little pain? She frowned for a moment, testing her right shoulder. She could indeed move it, but when she put her shoulder through a rear rotation, she hissed a curse, blushing as she realized she'd used one of the stronger Mandoa words. It only hurts when I rotate it backward, she said. Do some rotations that get it close to that point, but not at it. Get your muscles used to the motion again, and then do full workarounds. He intentionally ignored the curse. With what she'd gone through, she was rather entitled to it. Okay, and that is the end of chapter 15. Oh, hey. Maybe you could get through a couple more chapters. I was gonna read only to 16, but might get through a couple more. We'll see how it goes. Goodness, so sorry. This is what happens when I read. I get a dry throat. Alright. Yeah, I think I'm gonna try and read through chapter 17. So give me 2 seconds while I... Hold on, that didn't work. There we go. 2 seconds. Chapter... Yeah. Okay. I'm just updating the stream title a little bit. There we go. Yeah, some of these chapters are a little bit shorter than I remembered them being, so... Yeah. You'll have to remember also that most of these stories were written while I was in high school, so yeah, they would probably seem a little bit longer. So that's the thing. I'm dating myself a little bit. Sorry. Chapter 16. It was a long and rather dull flight back from Mandalore for Callista and Zan, but it took only a short time after their arrival on Catan for them to be called into work, as it were. A calm from Stefan broke Zan's near sleepwalking state as he unloaded the Pargila. How in the Manda? He asked himself after listening to the message and finishing with the last load of provisions. As he dropped the last container, he looked across the docking bay to his wife, and even though his helmet obscured his face, his surprise and confusion radiated through the force. Callista, I've got questions here. Zan looked up from where... Callista looked up from where she was tinkering with the hover sled, cursing silently. Then, she set down her tools and crossed the docking bay to where he was. The message icon was blinking on the corner of her HUD. When she reached him, she listened too. Some of Stefan's students attacked another one. What's on your mind, Siarka? She leaned against a stack of crates, but beneath her boise she was frowning. Zan took off his helmet and ran his hands through his hair. You mean besides the fact Stefan hauled off a comm, not knowing if we were on Catan or not? He said, with confusion finding a home in his voice. I didn't even know Jarius had a Padawan, never mind training one as a Mando. He yawned and rubbed his face with his free hand. I don't like it. It's the age-old prejudices again. Only Jedi are supposed to know better. He frowned. Callista frowned as well. I don't think she's Jarius' Padawan, Zanika. She reached out in the Force for a moment. It's more than that. As to Stefan, he informed us because you're on the council, and knowing him, he felt we could perhaps provide input on the situation. Zan scoffed. Yeah, I know. But, Shab, we just got here for Amanda's sake. I was hoping for 12 hours of sleep without moving, he complained. But we'd better get going, otherwise Jade will have my armor for a trophy for keeping her with there waiting. Callista chuckled. We can rest after. Something tells me this needs to be dealt with. She reached up and unsealed her helmet, shaking her hair loose as she pulled off the close-fitting hood. The council has agreed that something needs to be done, but they don't feel expulsion is the answer. That could create more problems. The options they presented, according to his message, was Chandrila. It's a more traditional academy. But is there another option? Zan seemed to stare off into space as they walked towards the Praxium for a minute before cracking a lopsided grin. I've got an idea that will allow us to see this new one in action as well. Then? She looked up at him momentarily, catching the gleam in his eye as she ran her fingers through her hair before pulling the close-fitting hood back up. You'll see, Siarka, he said as they rounded the final corner and stood just in front of the doors to the main hall. Munbajir, he said, before opening the doors and walking in. Callista blinked and pulled her helmet back on before she walked in beside him, taking in the room's occupants. Behind her visor, her eyes widened. She could guess who Jarius was by how he carried himself, and the girl with a similar tunic had to be Marin. Mana, she was young. Callista shook herself and turned her attention to Stefan. It's flipping viewpoint a little bit. Marin walked into the hall with Jarius just behind her. They'd taken a walk earlier to give her a chance to stretch her muscles and get used to being out again. When they'd returned, word had reached them that the High Council had made a decision of sorts, and that Master Card wanted all parties involved to meet in the main hall. She looked over and saw Andrea standing close to the chair that Stefan customarily used when he sat in the main hall to address the students. On the mat flooring, she noticed Jared kneeling, facing the chair in anticipation of something. Jerry saw him and looked to Andrea, who nodded, answering his unspoken question of who it was. Marion walked up next to Jared and knelt. When he noticed her, he looked in her direction and then noticed Jarius. Jared stood and bowed to the elder Mandalorian. "Sir," he said politely, "it is an honor to meet Marion's father. She has spoken very highly of you." Jarius nodded at the statement. It was a more traditional Kotani greeting. "I am honored to meet you, Jared," he answered, resting his hand on the young man's shoulder, "and I am grateful for your rush to my daughter's defense." "I would not allow anyone to attack her in such a way," Jared told him. "It wasn't just a matter of honor, as I consider her my friend." "May she always have friends like you," Jarius said as he let the boy kneel back down and walked over towards Andrea, who bowed her head for a moment. "Highness," Jarius greeted her as he returned the bow. "It was a pleasant thought when I heard that you had taken her under your wing." And I'm going to stop right there because we're about to have an ad. Ads are a great time to get a drink of water, have a stretch, go hug your kids, cuddle your pets, whatever you gotta do. We're going to be in an ad for about a minute and a half once it kicks in. So, and I will see you guys when I get back from the ad. So. It's gonna make a liar out of me. It's gonna make a liar out of me. Well, there it is. We'll be back in a minute and a half. Alright. While that's going on, I'm gonna have a stretch. We'll be back in about 36 seconds. Not all of them. That's a great question, actually. Thank you for that question, mate. That's an awesome question. So, let me backtrack a little bit. So, in this chapter specifically, let's see. If you remember at the beginning of the chapter, Zan and Callista were talking, the Ika suffix on a name is kind of an affectionate form. So you'll take, like, the first 3 letters of someone's name, as long as it ends on a consonant, like an L or something, and tack on the Ika. It's an affectionate term. Buir is, I mean, if you want to be real technical, it's parent. Because a lot of the Mandoa terms in that sense are gender neutral, but in this particular sense it's kind of inferred that it means father. So, let's see. Mven is like Maven means huh or Siarka is sweetheart. Yeah, trying to think if there's any other ones. Those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head from chapter 14 and 15. But yeah, definitely feel free to ask. I generally will not translate them as I'm reading because it tends to break the flow. But I do try to write in such a way that you can kind of infer the meaning. But definitely feel free to ask anytime. Thank you for asking, actually. That's an excellent question. Oh, sorry. Goodness. I have the hiccups, and I have no idea why. One second. Oh, here we go. Sorry, I had to find my spot. She is an excellent learner, Andrea told him. Daddy should be here in just a few moments. At that moment, the doors leading off to the side opened, and the four he had heard about entered the hall, pausing to look at him. They weren't told who he was, but the fact that he had a blaster on his hip and his tunic was the same cut as Marin's told them everything. He spared them the glare he'd thought about giving them, but he didn't need what ability he had in the Force to know that seeing him made them even more nervous than they already were. Go forward and kneel, he heard Master Card's voice behind him as they moved forward towards the central area of the hall, kneeling just as Jared and Marin were, but with a bit of space between the two groups. Stefan came in behind them and nodded to Jarius from where he stood with Andrea. Then he moved around and sat in the low seat that almost had him close to the floor. He looked over the 6 students kneeling before him and returned the bow that they gave him. The High Council has convened, and we have all meditated on what needs to be done here, he began to tell them. The decision we have reached was not easy and took some deliberation. He let that hang in the air for a moment before he looked at the 4 students who'd attacked Marin. 2 seconds, guys. There we go. The 4 of you have brought up a serious issue, but the Council feels that expulsion from the Order is not a wise decision. That part of his announcement sent a wave of relief through the students and almost brought a protest from Jarius had Stefan not held his hand up in Jarius' direction to keep him from saying anything. The Katani Jedi let the silence hang in the air before he brought the wristcom up and keyed in a channel he'd already set. Master Canadius, would you and Callista join us, please? He closed the channel and looked at the group of students, addressing the 4 of them first. What you did cannot be overlooked, but there is an opportunity to redeem yourselves in not just your own eyes, or in yours, he added as he looked to Marin and Jared, but also to the rest of the students here. Our master has proposed a challenge that the council has agreed to present to the 6 of you. If the 4 of you accept and complete it to his satisfaction and mine, you will have earned your right to remain at this Praxium. If you decline or fail to complete the challenge to our reckoning, you will be sent to study at the Jedi Academy on Chandrila. You must make a choice. At that moment, the sound of the massive wooden doors opening caused everyone's attention to turn in that direction. 2 figures had started to enter the room. Stefan nodded to them as they entered the hall, Andrea half smiling at seeing her adopted sister in her armor. Marin turned as she heard the doors open again. As the 2 of them entered, she gasped in surprise and a little excitement, stifling a surprised swear. Callista grinned, inclining her head in Andrea's direction in greeting as she looked around the room, trying to gauge the emotions of those present. The 4 students kneeling beside Marin were nervous. Marin and her companion seemed nervous, but also excited. Jarius, well, he was hard to read. She'd met him before, but he'd always been quiet. Zan looked at those gathered and gave a barely perceptible nod to Jarius and a wink to Andrea before bowing, even though it seemed somewhat stiff. In Stefan's direction, I'm not going to bother asking how you knew we were on Catan, Master Card, but I can see the seriousness of the situation. He then looked at the 4 students facing expulsion and glared. And I'm extremely disappointed. Callista almost said something, but understood that Zane knew what he was doing. She bowed politely to Andrea and Stefan before grasping Jarius' arm in the warrior's grip. Stefan suppressed his thoughts on that before introducing the 2 of them. Out of the students, only Jared knew who either of them were. This is Master Zan Canadius, he said as he stood up and returned to the bow. He's a Jedi Master as well as a Mandalorian warrior. His wife, Callista Jassarin, is also a Jedi Knight, and one of my former students. Jared looked around at the others to see their reaction to the newcomers. Andrea could sense their nervousness, but she shrugged it off as she went to hug her sister and Zan. Mando or not, he was her brother-in-law, and he would get one. Marin's eyes widened, and she glanced at Jarius, catching his slight nod as she made the connection. Callista grinned. Spotting Andrea headed their way. She pulled off her helmet and hood, exposing her dark brown hair and fair skin as she was enveloped in the hug by Andrea. Zan knew that trying to weasel his way out of a hug from Andrea was like playing hide-and-seek with a sarlacc. You always lost. So he embraced the younger Katani with a playful scowl for the embarrassment. Now that I'm properly embarrassed, I suppose we better get to the purpose of this little chat, he said gruffly. Callista grinned and jabbed him gently in the ribs with her armored elbow. Udesi, it won't kill you. It might even make you stronger, she told him with a wink before she sobered. That made Stefan laugh briefly as he motioned for Zan to present his idea to the students. Okay, I know what happened, and I know why. That doesn't really bother me. What bothers me is that it happened in the first place. Zan looked at the 4 troublemakers again. Forgetting that Master Card has the final say in anything here for a minute, do you want a chance to prove you deserve to be Jedi? Marin frowned briefly as she tried to understand what Zan was saying. She looked at Jared, and then looked at Jarius before both of them nodded. Zan nodded to Marin and Jared before again looking at the other 4. Sandcats got your tongues, gentlemen? He scowled. Speak up while you have a chance, 'cause your very place in this praxium depends on me and my judgment. The one closest to Marin and Jared, who had been the first to speak for them before the offense, and also the first to see his wrong judgment and ask forgiveness, bowed to the Jedi Master. Sir, I cannot speak for the others, but I have remorse for what happened. I want nothing more than to be able to redeem myself and earn my place and learn my path. I accept whatever challenge you present to me. Zan smiled from ear to ear after hearing that response, but it was not a smile that filled anyone with joy. It was rather evil looking. You're looking for redemption, Miven? Jate. Because by the Force you will earn that redemption. The 6 of you will report to me outside the main gate at 0400 tomorrow morning. You cannot bring weapons or sabers. He turned to Marin. Or Beskar-Gam. You are going to go hunting together. Marin's eyes widened. That won't be a problem, Master Canadius, as I don't have any Beskar-Gam yet. She traded a look with Jared, her gaze sliding to the other 4, and then her father. Zan scowled at Marin. This will not be as easy as you think, Vodika. Have you hunted any apex predators bare-armed before? Marin swallowed, chewing on her lip nervously at his question. Nish, Master Canadius, I have not. Zan nodded rather abruptly. Then think of hunting 4 of them. Marin couldn't help the whispered curse that fell from her lips at that. She felt Jared nudge her and flushed, realizing her slip. She then opened her mouth to apologize. Jarius looked over at her, his eyes telling her he'd heard the slip, and he glanced to Zan to see if he'd picked up on it. I told you this wouldn't be easy, Vodika. But the 6 of you need the reminder. He looked at the other 4. And some of you need to get a clue about how special being raised in my culture is. He said this with a growl that all but said such a statement was foolish. He glanced over the assembled Padawans before turning back to Stefan. Still, it's Master Card's final decision on whether this takes place, or you are given the first option. Stefan nodded and walked around the group to look over all 6 of them. Marin and Jared had both accepted, as had one of them. He turned his attention to the other 3. Do you let him speak for you, or do you have no voice at all? He asked, concerned that they had said nothing, now or earlier when he'd first brought them into the hall. I accept the challenge, Master, the student at the end said. I too, the one next to him said, but the third held his silence, and Stefan let it hang there for several moments, noting that the youth looked down at the floor. Zand grinned at that and looked at Jarius and then at his wife, but he remained silent. Mirren glanced sideways at the last student, confused. Yes, this would be hard, but she knew it had to be a better option than Chandrila, though she didn't know much about the other academy. So be it, Stefan said to the last student. The 5 of you pack what supplies you will need, essentials only. Then return to your quarters to rest for the trial. Callista shook her head at Zan, working to hide a smile of her own. She could tell that Marin seemed excited about the prospect of the trial, but then, that girl was used to that kind of thing. Zan spoke up. Get plenty of rest, because calisthenics tomorrow before the hunt will continue as normal. Marin nodded. Yes, masters, the rest of the students replied. She bowed, along with the rest of them, and then headed to her room, with one last look towards Andrea and then Jarius, before looking at Callista and Zan. Hi, darling sunshine. Can I get a shout out for her, please? Much appreciated. It's good to see you. We're having some cozy story time. And I'm actually gonna finish out this chapter, read one more, and then we're gonna call it a night. I have a meeting later. I know, meeting right before Thanksgiving. Sorry. Okay. What was it? That doesn't work, Rafe. You have to be a mod. I'll do it. I think Sniper is there we go. Yep, I think it's a mod or VIP in my channel. That way people don't flood my chat with No worries. No worries. I hope you're doing well, Sunshine. It's good to see you. There we go. The one student who stayed there briefly looked down before glancing up at Master Card. The look on his face said it all. Andrea, Stefan said to her, see to it that he is ready to travel. I will contact Jill Kun at the academy and have him send a shuttle. In the meantime, he can stay in his quarters tonight. Zan looked hard at the boy. Just one word of caution for you, boy, Zan said, knowing he'd catch hell later for this, but his pride demanded it. When you hear a Mandalorian say, don't mess with Mandos, mate, we're serious about that. If you wish to live longer, the next time you encounter one of us, don't even think about doing what you did here. And there's my timed message. Thank you, Frosty Tools. Yes, Father, Andrea said as she gestured for the student to follow her. With them gone, Stefan looked to Callista and Zan. What were you planning for them to hunt, out of curiosity? Zan scratched his head. Well, this is where I fill you in a bit more, I guess. Maven? He looked sheepish. I'm sure there are wolves of some sort around these forests, but the hunt is not meant to be successful. At least not in terms of the quarry. How do you mean? Callista asked, tilting her head slightly as she hefted her helmet. Zan looked at Callista. What was the one thing missing from this whole incident? What if it was there from the beginning? None of this would have happened. Wolfhounds can be pretty formidable, Stefan said as he leaned against the table, not responding to that second comment yet. Not much difference from a Vornsker. They're more dangerous in packs, though. You'll have to be careful about that. Callista frowned. They weren't working as a group except when the four attacked Marin. Stefan sighed and leaned up against the table again. He's right, Callista. Teamwork has been missing here. This incident opened my eyes to that. Zane nodded. And you don't work within a... And you don't work within a group well without communication. This exercise is meant to get them thinking as a group, working to stay alive and adapt to an arduous task. Alec, she said softly, her voice slightly sad. That's an important skill for anyone to have, but especially Jatize. Think about it from their point of view for a minute. You are given a near impossible task, but your pride still wants you to make a decent showing, right? What would you have to do in their place? Zan continued. I'd have to figure out how to make the best use of the skills at hand, be they mine or someone else's, she mused. The hardest part of that task will be the other three, Stefan interjected. Jared and Marin seem to pair together well on several occasions. Their test will be working with the others after what happened. That's why I put the rest in the same bind as Marin and Jared. They have the same skills, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But now that they're in the same situation and have the same challenge, don't you see that will alter their perceptions towards Marin and vice versa? Aye, Stefan agreed. And if this works well, it's something that they can pass on to the others. I wonder if this challenge you'd given them or something similar would be worth adding to their training. Jarius had come over while they were discussing the task, but he remained quiet. Now he spoke, turning his attention to Zan. That's a good point, and lesson for all of them. Zan grinned. It wouldn't hurt. Jarius and I know this because we were raised like this. It certainly wouldn't hurt Jedi students to have the same kind of other skills as we are raised to have. It would only make the Order that much more formidable. Jarius nodded. I agree there. As the Mandoade like to say, that which doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Stefan nodded at all of these ideas before smiling. Zane, you should have been a teacher with some of these ideas. Stefan's comment brought a slight chuckle to Jarius. Zan, teaching? I'd love to see that. Zan almost choked. If I were teaching, the faculty, not the students, would be running for the hills. I still get funny looks from the seamstress, which was when I was a boy. That brought a laugh out of Stefan. He could imagine a few council members picking up their jaws at the news of the Mando teaching Jedi students. The thought had him laughing enough that he almost had to catch his breath. Callista burst out laughing. Oh, I don't know, Shiarka. You're a pretty good teacher, I think. Xander shook his head. Anyway, one question I have here, Stefan. He looked at Stefan hard as if trying to figure something out. How in the name of Amanda did you even know we were on Catan? Jarius just smirked and watched the exchange, trading knowing looks with Callista. They both knew Stefan had his ways. Stefan merely tapped the side of his head. Zan, you're good, but you're not that good at concealing your presence in the Force. I felt you and Callista when you arrived in the system. She groaned. I knew I should have worked on that more. Zan shrugged and looked around at Jarius and Callista. Ever since Renfar, he's been spooky like that. I showed you the technique, Stefan told Callista as he looked in her direction. She frowned. You did, though I definitely need to work on it more. Want to learn how? Stefan asked Zan. Maker, I could show you. Technique? Zan raised an eyebrow. Make nose? Oh, man. Udesi, Callista told him, laughing. Force concealment takes a lot of work, Zan. But the other part you're talking about after Renvar, Mick showed me that in the middle of the fight. Callista nodded. I'm still working on force concealment. Stefan started teaching me the last time I was here, before we went to Mandayam. Concealment? I can see why it's useful. Zan thought for a moment, but then the good sense part of his brain shut down again. But Corellians don't need any advantage over Mandos. It's against the rules of nature. That brought another laugh from Stefan. All I can say, Zan, is that you'll have to take it up with Mick, and if he wanted to wait another week, he and Ari should be here. Callista chuckled and punched Zan in the arm. Grr, you forget. He's had a lot of time to figure this out. Zan sighed. I'll be glad to see them, especially the general, but I'm just glad we got here in one piece. Things on Monday M are getting bad. How so? Jarius asked from where he stood. He'd been so tied up with his own contracts and with training Marin that he'd been out of the loop on most everything else. The Kirtsad, what you would call the Death Watch, is getting bolder. During our stay, there were 15 raids at secure positions throughout Kaldabe. All of them were suicide attacks. One nearly got the Mandalore. This surprised Jarius and Stefan both. My lady, Jarius whispered. The Death Watch. It started to bring up an old feeling that caught Stefan's attention, and he laid his hand on Jarius' shoulder to help him calm. Control, Stefan whispered to his friend quietly. Jarius sighed at the comment and started to walk around. Mandalore stated briefly before the attack that it would be the position of the Protectorate to aid the New Republic in their efforts against the Sith. Deathwatch then stated that if the Mandalore didn't back down, the Protectorate would have to fight battles on two fronts, all but threatening civil war. Callista glanced over at Jarius, feeling the swell of emotion. After a moment's thought, she went over and laid her hand on his shoulder before returning to Stefan and Zan. She figured now wasn't the best time or place to ask about it. Nope. We got an ad coming up in 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Zan paused. I take it you were there, was a victim of them? Jarius? Stefan rubbed his chin as he thought on it until Zan asked the question, making him bring his gaze to Zan and then drift to Jarius. Jarius merely nodded, his gun hand curling into a fist. Fist, wow. Words. My wife and daughter, to get to me since I wouldn't take their offer to join up. Callista's heart lurched at the raw pain she felt coming off of him in the Force, though she could tell he was working hard to control it. Stefan looked over in Callista's direction, nodding to her when they made eye contact. Jarius didn't notice it and started rubbing his weapon hand. If you're investigating this, Zan, I suggest talking to a Doug around the old section of Mos Espa. I was on an information retrieval contract last and heard him mention them. He gave me a lead on the specific Deathwatch group that's responsible. Thank you. Hi, Zoo! I need a sound for my redeems. I need to work on that. Yeah, that's why I have the thing. Hello, Miss Ma'am. How are you? And do my stretch. Oh, I'm slouching again. So bad. Stretch. Yes, thank you for the stretch and the posture check. Much needed. That's why I tell people yell at me if you see me slouching. And hydrate. Because I've been reading for like 2.5 hours straight. Well, hour and a half. Wow. I can't even math. Naps are awesome. I love naps. I'll hopefully get a lot of those this weekend. I have... Yes. It's very important. While we're on a pause from reading, please make sure that you guys are taking care of yourselves. Please yell at me if I'm not. That's why most of my redeems are self-care. If you don't see me drinking enough water, please yell at me. If you see me slouching, please yell at me. Because I'm really bad at it. Yes, all the bunks. All of the bunks. Feel free to bunk me if I forget to take my meds or drink my water. Even that. So we're just about done with wrong browser. We're just about done with chapter 16, and I was going to read one more. I thought I was going to run, might actually go a little bit past 9 today. Thought I was going to go later than that, but chapters are short. So I will see if I can finish out this chapter before the ad. We'll find out. Cooking. I hope you have some yummy food. Well, I'll be here for at least another half hour and change. So please feel free to lurk away while you're cooking. Hi, Taba. Yes, all of the happy Thanksgivings, and I hope everybody's enjoying the story so far. We're about halfway through at this point of this particular story. So I hope everybody's enjoying. It's good to see you, Taba, and happy Thanksgiving to you and everybody else in chat. One of the reasons why I'm streaming tonight is because I wanted to give everybody a chance to hang out, chill together, find some cozy vibes, and just relax before the holiday, because I know that there's a lot of people that for whatever reason aren't able to be with family, so I just wanted to give you guys a place to hang out. So yes, and we're gonna be in an ad, so I'm just gonna wait. So take your minute and a half, get some water, get a snack, grab a blanket, snuggle your cat or your dog if you have them. Yes, all the loves. But it's good to see you, Taba and Zoo and Sunshine and Wraith and Shadow and whoever else might be here that I didn't see in chat. I do appreciate everybody who's here, even if you're just lurking. And we're in an ad. It's gonna end in a minute and 25 seconds. I am gonna drink some water. Be back in about 12 seconds. And we're back from our ad. Thank you so much for hanging out through that ad. I appreciate that. They do help support the channel. I know that feeling. I know that feeling. Well, we're gonna get through hopefully one more chapter, and then I'm gonna call it a night. Usually I'll read out, but I haven't decided if I want to do that yet. So we'll decide that when we get there. Here we go. Stefan rubbed his chin as he thought on it until Zan asked the question, making him turn his gaze to Zan and then drift to Jarius. Jarius only nodded, his gun hand curling into a fist. My wife and daughter, to get to me since I wouldn't take their offer to join up. Callista's heart lurched at the raw pain she felt coming from him through the force, though she could tell he was working hard to control it. Stefan looked over in Callista's direction, nodding to her when they made eye contact. Jarius didn't notice it and started rubbing his hand. If you're investigating this, Zan, I suggest talking to a Doug around the old section of Mos Espa. I was on an information retrieval contract last and heard him mention them. He gave me a lead on the specific Death Watch group that's responsible. Zan nodded as well, but something cold started crystallizing in his gut. That sounds good, but also not so good, if it means what I think it does. Plus, there are other rumors. What other rumors? Jarius asked, suddenly turning to look at him. He didn't want to wait for an answer and cross the room to rejoin the group. What other rumors, Zan? Calm down, Stefan told Jarius in his teacher's tone. Jarius, you're contemplating a path you've already walked, and you know where it leads. It's still hearsay among the Mandawari that frequent the Tapcafs, but there's a rumor that the Death Watch has formed its own alliances. That got Stefan's attention. The Sith? He asked. Zan looked over at Jarius. Vengeance will wait till the enemy is truly known, Vald. No, the Death Watch has had too much personal history being used by the Sith to ever trust them again, but that's all I know right now. Stefan nodded, his thoughts interrupted by the deep sound of the bell echoing through the hall. Callista looked back and forth between them, staying silent for the moment. Something about how Jarius had asked the question worried her slightly. She looked across to Stefan. I'll need to talk to you later. Agreed, he told her as he looked to the others. They've prepared dinner if you three want to join the students. And that's the end of chapter 16, I think. Yeah, end of chapter 16. Okay. Did I forget to mark the hydrate? My bad. Camera's being up. There we go. For whatever reason, my camera likes to be a punk on occasion. Oh, sorry. Let me mark that hydrate. Thank you, sir. I thought I had taken care of that. Also, if you guys want to post follow that link and post on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever social media you use, please feel free. Not required, but I appreciate it if you do. I don't have a Twitter myself anymore, but feel free to post on social media if you feel so inclined. Alright. Okay. Totally like not clicking on the right window. Pro streamer. Okay. Chapter 17. Later, after Stefan had returned home, he sat in the chair in his study looking at the fire that still burned in the living room fireplace. He noticed Callista walking into the room and motioned for her to sit. You look like a person who'd like a few answers. She chuckled and shook her head at him as she sat down. She was dressed now in a well-worn coverall. I noticed earlier that Jarius had a hard time getting a handle on his emotions when the topic of Deathwatch and his wife came up, she said. Stefan nodded and got up to put a few extra logs on the fire and leaned against the stone mantel for a moment. The Deathwatch approached Jarius trying to recruit him. He wasn't a Mandalorian then, but somehow word of his combat service and accomplishments reached them, and they thought his skills would be useful. When he refused, they decided to send him a message. His wife and unborn daughter were on a transport from their home to Catan for a medical checkup when she disappeared. What was left of her was found a week or so later. The night that Jarius was given the news, there was a message for him from the same Mandalorian who had approached him. They didn't know that Jarius could use the Force, which was unknown even to him, and his sorrow turned to fury when he got that message. Callista's face paled slightly, but she wasn't as surprised as she might have been. She'd seen their handiwork firsthand. "What did the message contain?" she asked softly. And then she nodded. "Sorrow can give one power, and it can be dangerous." She stared into the fire. "He never told me what it said," Stefan replied as he sat back down. "But he started with the one who'd approached him in a way that I'd never heard of one doing before. After reading every bit of information he could from the Mandalorian, he strapped him to the end of his ship's engines before heading to his next destination, and it just kept going from there until a fellow Mandalorian and I were able to find him and stop him." Callista couldn't help it and cursed in Mandoa. A man consumed by such sorrow is hard to reason with. She chewed on her bottom lip for a moment. "I'm glad you found him. I'd hate to think what would have happened if you hadn't." And then she smiled. "And he wouldn't have found Marin. I can tell that having her in his life has helped a lot. Still, that's a heavy burden for one to carry." Turn that down a bit. One sec. Okay. There we go. "It is. And I'm glad he found her as well. From what I understand, it has helped them both. What got to him was that Marin was the age that his daughter would have been by now, which was a driving force behind him adopting her as his own." She nodded. "Alec, that makes sense. From what I've seen, she's his whole life now. I'm sure she's had Mando training, and she's getting training in the way from you. But what of other skills? I noticed she was walking a bit stiffly." "That would be from a trial that the Mando who helped me stop Jarius put her through. I believe you remember Ethan?" She nodded. "Also some residuals from the fight she was in?" She smiled after a moment. "Ithaca's Mando adds to the core. He was raised that way from what I understand. I met him during our last trip to Mandayam, that is, before he left, presumably to head out this way. He let the fact that Marin was starting to show him up in his own game get to him," Stefan said with a slight chuckle. "Marin has a natural ability in force concealment and concealing herself from non-force users. Thanks to Jarius' training at his home in Tanagas' deep forest, she knows how to move through forest pretty well. She hasn't been here long, but her saber technique is improving by leaps and bounds like she was a natural again. Andrea has been teaching her the fourth form and expressed her feelings that Marin is almost like her own Padawan. Personally, her abilities and her thirst for learning all that she can remind me of someone else I know." Callista grinned. "Candosula, I get the feeling that Ethan will calm down. He's set in his ways a bit." She then leaned forward. "Force concealment, Maven. That's a rather rare skill for which to have a natural talent, right?" "It is," he told her. "Oh?" Callista asked, raising an eyebrow at his last comment. "She seems to absorb anything you teach her quickly. A handy skill, that." "Yes, it is," he told her. "It reminds me a lot of you when you started learning from me." She chuckled. "Ah, now that you mention it." She clasped her fingers over her knee. "I could see about teaching her some basic healing techniques. She could probably use them, especially with the training that she does with Jarius and Ethan." He chuckled and nodded at the comment. "Well, did you feel the sudden recognition in her when you first entered the hall?" "Alec, I did. Though I know I've never met her before. I've met both Jarius and Ethan on different occasions." "Your reputation has preceded you with her," Stefan said. "If you ask, I'm fairly certain she'll enjoy the chance to learn, and be prepared for many questions. The girl is like a Mon Calamari sponge regarding information." Callista did laugh. "No. I'll keep that in mind. It's good that she's curious, though. I don't know much about her, but I did get the feeling that she's been feeling a bit out of place. So her asking questions is a good thing." "I think that's mainly because of her past," Stefan said. "Jarius found her as an orphan, and all she's known between then and coming here was just her and Jarius with a couple visits from Ethan. This has been an entirely new experience for her. He looked at the chrono in the corner of the family's flat screen. If you're going to go with them in the morning, you'll need some rest too, daughter. I'm sure Zan doesn't like falling asleep without you close nowadays. She mused for a moment. That makes sense now and explains her quiet and slightly withdrawn demeanor. She sighed. You're right, Boer. She rose and hugged him tightly. Fair evening. Here we go. It was chilly outside the Praxium's gates the next morning. If his eyes could have been trusted due to his lack of sleep, he would swear that some of the treetops had light frost glinting in the moonlight. He could see it in the air as his breath turned into fog every time he breathed. But the early time was necessary, especially since wolfhounds tended to travel in the earlier parts of the day, saving their strength when it was fully light for rest and communion with the pack. As Zane waited for the 5 students to arrive, he wondered what possessed him to wear typical robes instead of Beskargam this morning. But then it occurred to him. They need to see that we're all equal in this, no exceptions. He allowed himself to yawn briefly before he heard the doors to the Praxium open and groans filled the air as the students made their way outside the gate. Marin was one of the first of the 5 to exit the Praxium. She was dressed in a set of fatigues she often used for training with Ethan. The early morning fog hovered close to the ground, and she looked around before spotting Master Canadius off to the left. She settled her small pack over her shoulders and headed towards him. Jared was the second to exit the Praxium. Knowing the environment they'd be entering, he wore more durable trousers with his boots and only wore his inner kimono and vest with a belt and a pack that slipped over his shoulders to hold his gear. Per the Mandalorian's order, he carried no weapons, but a few rations, water, and other items that might come in handy. There was already a light sheen on his forehead from doing a few warm-ups and exercises in the training circle. Seeing Marin already there surprised him that he hadn't felt her pass by him, as he'd warmed his muscles up for the cool air of the day ahead. Marin spotted him and wandered over. "J'ai the farthur, Jared," she said, settling her pack on her shoulders as she walked with him towards Master Canadius. Privately, she was glad he'd be along, for she still wasn't sure about the other 3. The remaining 3 came at different times, similarly dressed to Jared, expecting their robes to be more of a hindrance in the forest. They also carried packs and nodded to Marin and Jared as they arrived. "What do you think he's got in mind?" Jared asked her as he stretched a little more. Marin shrugged. "Manta only knows. If it's anything like what Boer and Etika put me through, it'll be quite the challenge." "I couldn't sleep much at all," one of the others said as he looked out over the forest below. Wondering what was going to be happening. "I regret what brought this up, Marin, and I sincerely apologize, but I feel that we're going to have, well, I can't describe it." "A good time?" Jared said, half-jokingly. "I'm not sure if what I've heard about Master Canadius' reputation is even half true." Zan scowled when he saw the size of the packs that each student carried. He said nothing but walked to the new arrivals and looked at the packs closely. While he didn't think they would have brought anything that could have been used as a weapon, the size of the packs was a concern. They were almost overpacked. Future advice: you don't need that many ration bars and changes of clothes for a hunt of a few hours' length. Warm up, and then I'll fill you in. He looked at Jared and Marin and almost smiled, but his concern for the lesson kept it from his face. Marin raised an eyebrow at the other boy, gesturing for him to continue. "I don't think I ever caught your name." She stopped when Zan approached them and listened when he spoke. The others were overpacked a bit. She'd learned to pack light. Her training with Etika had come in handy. "Yes, Master," the one that had spoken up said as he started to give some room for the others to work. "It's Bran, and it should have been the first thing I said when you arrived." He smiled slightly and started the warm-up stretches he'd been taught. Jared looked at him and smiled, and then over at Marin before he resumed stretching. "It's a start." Marin shrugged, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her mouth as she set down her small pack and began working through the warm-up Stillen had taught her, and some of the Terraskasi ones that Jarius had. One of the other boys had seen the exchange and looked down for a moment before looking up to Marin. "Dabbit," he told her as he started to warm up. The third offered a smile as he started to stretch. Koya. Marin smiled slightly, trying to be encouraging, though she was still wary of them. Sequoia, to all of you, she said, reaching over to clasp each of them by the forearm as she'd been taught. Zan cleared his throat and waited until everyone turned their attention to him. Jait Vartur, everyone. For those that don't know, that means good morning. He allowed a small smile to cross his lips before continuing. Today you will experience something that a few of you considered a special training. This is a hunt. It is known in Mandoa as Moonbajir, or Teach Hard. That means nothing about this task will be easy. You will have to rely on each other and your skills, utilizing them as a group to secure your objective. He paused. Your objective is to kill and bring back to the gates 6 hours from now, no less than 4 Merrill wolfhounds of adult size. He stopped to allow this to sink in. Jira's eyes widened slightly at the announcement of their task, nodding softly as he thought about what it would take to do this. Marin hid a smile as he translated the Mandoa phrases, and then she frowned, surprised as he continued. 4 in 6 hours? That's asking a lot. Now, normally wolfhounds would be hunted with slug throwers or vibroblades. You don't have this luxury, but you can make do with creative thinking and teamwork to complete the task. That will require you all to do something that your previous fight did not. Communicate and work together. Marin swallowed, chewing on her lip for a moment. Since they didn't have weapons, they'd have to make some. She'd started making a mental list of materials they'd need before she pushed to her feet. 6 hours from then would put the sun high. She glanced over at the other boys, seeing that they actually made eye contact this time. That was a good sign. Now then, this task can be completed if you remember your skills, each other, and remember that you all have one thing in common: the Force. With such an ally on your side, you can complete this task. It will be challenging, no doubt, but if you do, it will show that no matter what culture, race, or language that we have, we are stronger if we are together. Jared was also making mental notes. It had been a while since he'd had to rely on the kind of hand-fashioned weapons they would need. He caught Marin's look and nodded softly. Bran nodded as well, but he could tell that David and Koya were new to this. When you have completed your task, or the 6 hours have expired, you are to present yourselves in front of Master Card, myself, and Knight Jassarin in the main hall with your kills. At such time, we'll make our final decision. Now then, do you have any questions? Marin took a deep breath. She'd caught the bewildered look of the other two as well. She smiled slightly at Zan's words. They did indeed have the Force on their side. She looked over at Jared and shook her head, but since the others might have questions. Jared thought about it momentarily after Master Canadius had given them their final instructions. Well, he started, walking down the trail, if we do this, we'll need the right tools for the job. There's a stream not far down the trail. We should be able to get a good start there. The right tools? Bran asked as he fell in behind him. Aye, Jared answered as the other two and Marin followed. He said we couldn't bring weapons with us. He didn't say anything about not making them. Marin grinned. Exactly. I was more paying attention to what he didn't say. She skirted around the three boys until she was next to Jared. I know how to make some simple weapons. My Beware and Edeka taught me as part of my training. Good, Jared said as he looked over at Bran. Have you done anything like this? Maybe a few wooden ones before. Stakes, mostly, Bran answered as he looked at the other two. You? They both shook their heads. I didn't have that kind of background, Dava answered. And, sad to say, I came from Coruscant, Koya added. I didn't know what a forest was like until I came here. Marin couldn't help a sympathetic smile from crossing her face. She traded a look with Bran and Jared. It looks like we'll be giving them a crash course in hunting with primitive tools, then. She was already scouting around for some good straight branches for spears. She'd been pocketing some appropriate small stones along the path. Jared had picked up a few as well, primarily to fashion a few things from what he'd hoped to find at the stream. It took a little bit of time for them to walk, but they reached the stream Jared had mentioned shortly after, and he wasted no time stripping off his pack and wading into the water to start looking through the stones at the bottom. He picked up one, looked it over, and grabbed a second that caught his attention. "These will work nicely," he said as he moved to the bank and sat down, taking one of the other stones he'd found and hammering away at the outside edge of one of the river stones. He placed one next to him and motioned for David to sit with him. "Start with the image of a simple knife in your mind," he told him as he handed David one of the rocks he picked up along the trail, "and then start chipping away at it, little by little." Marin did the same, collecting a few river stones of her own. She passed one each to Bran and Koya and a stone or two from her pocket as she settled down near Jared. It was crucial to have someone nearby to show them how to shape the stone, as they only had a little time. Carefully, Marin began shaping her own stones, 2 arrowheads taking shape under her strikes. Jared looked over at her progress and was starting to get curious. "Arrowheads?" he asked. "Your father showed you how to make a bow?" Marin shrugged, grinning slightly. "More like I watched him use an old Katani warbow and remembered. You can also use them as spearheads. Lash them well to a sturdy limb." She stood and scouted along the stream until she found a suitable branch. She came back and sat down, pulling some string from her pack, and then began lashing one of the stone points to the end to make a spear. Jared nodded his understanding, finishing the rough outline of his knife, and checked David's progress before pulling out a metal rod with a suddenly flattened edge to one end. He started to use this to make notches along the cutting edge of his knife, honing the edge to start sharpening it. He noticed that David, Bran, and Koya were looking on now while he finished along one side and began to work on the other. Marin's eyebrows rose as well. She wasn't sure exactly what the rod was, but it intrigued her. She continued fashioning her spear and then set it aside as she carefully shaped several smaller points to be used as arrowheads. She'd collected some suitable thin branches for the arrow shafts, but needed something to make the fletching to balance the arrows. "It's a flaking tool," Jared told them as he worked. "It takes off smaller amounts and gives you a sharp edge." He finished the cutting side and cut a few notches into the other side of the blade before picking up some pieces of wood lying around. Peeling a few layers off, he then grabbed his pack and some flat cords to lash the wood layers to the grip. Once he had enough cords wrapped around the grip, he tied it securely and checked to ensure that it wouldn't slip, and then hefted it to check its balance. One down, one to go. Carefully, Marin lashed the arrowheads to the shafts, one by one, taking a larger stone that she'd fashioned into a knife. She cut the cord and knotted it tightly, holding the point secure. She then used the knife to split the other end of each shaft, fraying it a bit to provide balance. She finished that and trekked a little down the trail, searching for wood for the bow. It took a bit, but she finally found one that she hoped would work. With that in hand, she returned to the others, where she used the knife to strip the bark and one of the river stones to polish the wood before cutting notches on each end for the bowstring. Jared helped the others finish their knives. They started finding short and mid-length hardwood branches, clipping offshoots from them and sharpening one end. While Bran, David, and Koya were working on their spears, Bran began making a small fire to heat treat the sharpened ends. Jared fashioned his second knife, a slightly longer one than his first. Chewing her lip, Marin carefully bent the wood from which she'd made the bow. She slipped one looped end of her bowstring over the notched end. It settled snugly into the groove. Then she did the same with the other end, testing it with a few practice draws. The bow flexed well, and it didn't break. Setting it down, she took a long and wide strip of bark from one of the trees, carefully punching a series of holes in it with her knife. Folding it over, she used her cord to lace it up, fashioning a rough quiver for her half-dozen arrows. She then attached a length of cord to it, creating a way for her to sling it over her shoulder. Jared looked at her and nodded, and then towards the other three, who nodded as well that they were done with their preparations. "Okay," he said as he stood up, collecting his things and settled his pack on his shoulders. "Let's hunt." And that is the end of chapter 17. What's going to happen next? What do you think? So that's the end of chapter 17. Yeah. So it's gonna get real interesting. Oops. Try that again. There we go. So yeah. Suspense. It's a thing. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this evening. And just so you guys are aware, I am preparing to stream for Starlight. For their streaming for Starlight for December 1 through 12 to raise money for Starlight Children's Foundation. I will continue my normal content. I will just have some information about Starlight Children's Foundation and ways that donating will help them. For those who are not familiar with Starlight Children's Foundation, they actually raise money to provide things for children who are in the hospital. Let me actually find that because I was just looking at it. Just to give you guys an idea of what kinds of things that they do. So, that's not what I wanted to open. Thanks, computer. So let's see. For every $10 donated, you can provide access for 10 kids to use Starlight VR. For every $20, it provides 20 hours of play on a Starlight gaming station. $40 can provide a Starlight hospital gown, which they do have Star Wars versions of those, so that is a possibility. They're really cute. A $50 donation can help ship toys, books, and more to a local hospital. There are 4 hospitals in my area that actually work with Starlight, so there's potential for that. $250 can provide a custom wagon to a hospital. That wagon is soft and cozy and allows the child to sit up in comfort, and if I remember correctly, you can attach like an IV pole to it. $500 can provide toys, arts and crafts, and more to 500 plus kids diagnosed with cancer. $1,000 can provide 40 back-to-school packs full of school supplies. And $1,600 can fund a Starlight Nintendo Switch handheld. It's designed for kids to use. And then $5,000 can fund a Starlight Nintendo gaming station. For anybody that's curious about Starlight Children's Foundation and what they do, you can check out starlight.org. As I said, I will be doing some fundraising for them between December 1 and the 1st and the 12th. I will be streaming 4 times in that period. My normal Sunday and Wednesday streams, and I also added a Friday stream in there. So December 1st, 4th, and actually let me go look. I have to go look. Oh, of course I'm in an ad. Ugh. Of course I'm in an ad while I'm trying to talk about this. Oh my goodness. Okay. Of course I'm in an ad. Oh dear. Are we out of the ad yet? Okay, we're out of the ad yet. Probably missed about half of that. Yeah, I'm actually gonna go, I'm looking at it now. Yes, you are actually correct, Wraith, thank you. So yes, I will be streaming on December 1st, which will be a writing workshop. I will be streaming on December 4th, which is a storytime stream, which is what we're doing tonight. I will be streaming on Friday the 6th, which is going to be SWTOR. And then my final stream is going to be December 11th, which is also going to be another SWTOR stream. So I'm kind of splitting a little bit. So you guys probably missed about half of my explanation because we were in an ad, so I'm going to do it again. So for those who are unfamiliar with Starlight Children's Foundation, they are an organization that help raise money and fund to be able to donate different things to hospitals that they work with. So you can, for anybody that donates, let's see, I was just looking at it too. For instance, a donation of $10 can provide access for 10 kids to Starlight VR. A donation of $20 can provide 20 hours of play on a Starlight gaming station. A donation of $40 can provide a Starlight hospital gown, which is super comfy and cozy. And they do have Star Wars versions of those, by the way. They're super cute. I've seen pictures. A donation of $50 can help ship toys, books, and more to area hospitals, 4 of which in my area actually do work with Starlight. There are 4 in my area that work with Starlight. A donation of $250 can provide a custom wagon to a hospital. This wagon is padded and comfy and comfortable for the kids to sit in and helps them sit up. And I think that you can actually attach an IV pole to it if you need to. A donation of $500, and this is cumulative, like, you know, if I raised $500, it could help provide toys and arts and crafts supplies to 500 or more kids diagnosed with cancer. A total donation of $1,000 or more can provide 40 backpacks to kids going back to school with school supplies. A cumulative donation of $1,600 can help fund a Starlight Nintendo Switch handheld. And a cumulative donation of $5,000 or more can help fund a Starlight Nintendo gaming station. So, I don't know about you guys, but providing toys and games for kids who are stuck in the hospital is kind of a big deal for me because I spent a lot of time in the hospital as a kid. Maybe not from cancer, but for anybody that's been stuck in the hospital as a kid, having things that allow you to be a kid is really important. So this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to help support Starlight Children's Foundation this December. So I would be very happy if you guys would hang out. And even if you're not able to donate and support the cause, just being here is support enough in my eyes. You know, just being here and showing your support in that way is really important. So I would love to see you guys. And I'm super excited to be able to do this for the first time. Also really nervous. So really looking forward to the opportunity to be able to do that and raise some money for Starlight. And I will see you guys back here on Sunday, December 1st for streaming with Starlight and a writing workshop where we're going to work on some more chapters. I hope you all have an awesome night and a great Thanksgiving tomorrow. And if you're unable to be with family, please know that I'm thinking about you and I'm hoping that you're at least able to have a quiet and cozy day. So take care of yourselves, be kind to yourself, and I will see you next time. Thanks, guys.